Evening and welcome to the first ever SRBC podcast. I'm Grant Lyman. I'm going to be your host this evening. We're going to discuss things that happened in the first round of the SRBC Championships, the Porsche Challenge and the SRTCC. I am joined this evening by Dan McCalla, our lead commentator for SRBC, Costas Avraam, driver for full Monty Plastering Porsche, and then John Dean Smith, who is representing NAPA Racing UK, driving a Ford Focus. So, as you can see, we've got Brands Hatch Indy coming up in 2 weeks' time. But first, let's take a look back at the Porsche races that we had at Donington Park National. So, we had a few different points of interest to start with. I was mostly impressed with Aidan Carter's performance through the race weekend itself. Dan, I know you were very impressed with his driving throughout the whole weekend.
Yeah, his race pace was absolutely superb, and he did about mid 105 in qualifying, I think. And I think we all expected that his race pace was going to drop off. And obviously, Martin Buchan went off halfway around the first lap of race one, and we thought, well, Aidan would probably have this under control. And he was still putting in pretty much like 106 zeros, 106 ones at will. I mean, we know from the last Suez race, and obviously being around the Simply Race Centre, we know Aidan is a very, very good driver. But to win that race in what is a very, very difficult car to drive, as I know John and Costas are going to talk about, by over 12 seconds, was genuinely very, very impressive indeed. I think it probably gave Martin a bit of a shock more than anything, because I think Aidan's really set his stall out in the Porsches this year. I think he's going to be the man to beat.
Yeah, Martin's pace looked strong, but I think he just needs to find, like you said, just that little bit more to be able to put in a full-blown challenge into the championship. You can see the championship results on the screen at the moment. Just 2 points in it between the top three. Really impressed with Adam Christopher getting P2 in both races. Like, really, you have to say that's the most consistent drive out of all the drivers in that series. You know, he's not had the race win, but finishing P2 in both races, considering race 2 is a reverse grid race, that's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, I'm gonna use this first opportunity of many when we do these podcasts over the season to bring in some tenuous MotoGP analogies. Because I watch a lot of MotoGP, and Moto3 in particular, and I'm going some of this for Grant, trust me, is one of those championships where if you're consistent and you can get in the lead group and you can pick out results, it can really, really help. And I remember Sergio Garcia last year, and Ayumu Sasaki's done it again this year in Moto3, where they might not have a completely nothing race, and they'll be absolutely nowhere, and so they'll pop up and finish on the podium. And Adam's races were like that at Donington. They just, typical Adam, very consistent, nothing really overly spectacular, but did the job, kept it on, and got 2 second place out of it, which is why he's got those points. So obviously we don't know whether Adam's going to be able to join us for the rest of the season. I hope he will, with obviously various other personal commitments that he has. But it's good. It does sort of underline his ability as a driver, because these are very different, and I can speak from experience, having driven the Alpines myself this year, and I know John can as well. These are a very, very different kettle of fish to drive from the Alpines that we had in this championship last season. So to go from doing touring cars and Alpines and these and being competitive all three, it really does underline Adam's capabilities.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take this moment as well to bring in one of our guests, John Dean Smith. It was an interesting first round for you, I would say. Me and Dan noticed a few times in practice there was quite a few offs. Didn't know whether that was the old-fashioned sort of like Schumacher style of bin it in practice, win it in the race sort of thing, or whether it was a genuine struggle to just find that consistency. Obviously, in the races, in the qualifying, you did a 105.969, which was 6/10 off the pole time, so it was a pretty decent lap. In race 1, you finished P10, and race 2, you finished P6, so a slight improvement in race 2 there. How did you find the weekend itself, John, just in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't particularly what I was aiming for. After qualifying, managing to get down into the 105s, I was quite happy with that. I mean, Aidan just appears to have been in a league of his own, especially when it came to qualifying. And honestly, it's just such a difficult car to get your head round, really. You think you found something, and then you try to repeat it the following lap, and all of a sudden you're off backwards into a barrier. So yeah, the offs in practice, I was trying to get as many out of the way as possible, trying to find as much time as I could where I could before it really, really mattered. However, I just couldn't find the consistency that I needed to keep it together for the entire race distance round Donington, especially at the old hairpin.
Just looking ahead, John, because I'm thinking about the kind of tracks that we have over the course of the season. Donington's a fairly fast-flowing track. There's only one really big stop, which is the chicane at the end. And I'm just thinking now how hard these cars are to get stopped, pick the right braking point and downshift and everything. When we get somewhere like Croft or maybe even Alton, I've got a feeling it's going to be even more difficult. I mean, if they're challenging now around a track like Donington, what's it going to be like when we get to the other tracks over the winter?
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult one to call because it's, as I said, it's such an unpredictable car. I mean, me and Costas have just been doing some testing around Brands, and you pick a braking point, and all of a sudden you think, oh, I found something there. You pick the same braking point again the following lap, and you might be 2 inches to the left, 2 inches to the right, and that all of a sudden makes a humongous difference to the car. And it doesn't seem to like curbs. It especially doesn't seem to like it when you run particularly wide over the curbs, get a wheel off the outside edge of the curb. Really, really upsets the car. And trying to get it back in line and trying to get it to do what you want it to do once it's become unsettled, it's really, really difficult. It's such a challenging car. And I mean, it's one of the things that I like about the car is it is such a challenge to drive. But once you've sort of got to that stage of, oh yeah, I think I've got something here, you then try and repeat it, and you just can't seem to do it a lot of the time. And personally, I know I can't seem to find that repetitive consistency, and it does always seem to sort of be in the same place that I end up losing the consistency that I'm trying to find. I'll take a line slightly different just to try and get the car to settle a little bit better, and by doing so, where I think I've tried to improve, I've actually lost. I've ended up unsettling the car more, or I've settled the car better, but it's put me in the wrong position for braking, and it just makes it so difficult to keep that consistency.
Just to bring Costas in, because we haven't heard from you yet. Hello, Costas. You are still here. Just to expand on what John was saying there, would you think it's fair to say that this is the kind of car where if you push it too hard or try and overdrive, it's going to do you more harm than good?
100%. It's gonna bite. You know, as John says, you're going into a corner. You hit your braking spot, nice and smooth. Come in next lap. You think you do the same again. You feel like you've done the same again, but the car it just handles differently. You might have caught it. It's on a slight bump, and yeah, she'll push on, and yeah, she'll try to bite. It's the thing is with the Porsches is trying to keep that consistency. It's for me, going into a race is just forget about the others. Don't try and chase lap times. Don't try and chase the car in front. Just do your own thing. Keep it on the black stuff. And you know, as we saw in the last race, there's a few people spinning off.
Yeah, I can attest to that one. Unfortunately, in race 2, I was basically doing exactly as you've just said, Costas. I'd found myself in the lead of the race, having got there quite successfully personally, from my own opinion. I was quite happy with a lot of the moves that I ended up making to get to the front of that race, and then found myself once again, same as I did in race 1, I just lost that consistency again through the old hairpin. I don't really know what I did. I felt that I'd obviously outbraked myself into the old hairpin. I'd taken the left-hander down through the craners slightly wrong, which had unsettled the car, which meant I'd slightly missed my braking point for the old hairpin, and same as I did in race 1, as soon as I turned in, I knew I'd just carried too much speed and lost the back end. And even specifically trying to just focus on my own race, ignore the fact that I could see Martin Buchan and Adam Christopher closing the gap behind me, trying to keep that out of my head and keep that to the back of my mind and just focus on consistently lapping and making sure I didn't put a foot wrong. Unfortunately, I still managed to drop it again, and it's just, I can only put it down to myself for using the wrong line. and unsettling the car in a way that it didn't like, but also at the same time just the car being as challenging as it is to keep that consistency and to keep it doing the same sort of thing.
And it's like you mentioned, they are very challenging cars to drive. But if you get it right, if you get a clean lap or a clean race, you feel like you've rewarded yourself for it. It's a good feeling knowing that you have got something like that underneath you. And if you're getting it wrong into a corner, you've got it wrong before you've gone off, before any sign that the car's lost it or anything like that. You just know that it's gone.
I mean, it's one thing that we mentioned in commentary, Grant, because Jack Bonney was obviously he's a relative newcomer here. Was very quick, was on for a podium finish in race 1 and lost it at the old hairpin with a lap and a half to go. I know he had enough in race 2 as well, and that's kind of where the experience comes in, isn't it? That you have, and it was the same in the touring cars as well. When we saw obviously there was a bit of a gap between the drivers that had been here before and the drivers who were new, and we'll come to that when we talk about touring cars a bit later on. But yeah, with being so difficult to drive, that little bit of extra experience and now seemed to make a big difference with the Porsches.
100%. Costas getting that P3 in the first race definitely did wonders for his standings at the end of the round. He's ahead of Ben Bennyworth, who is an extremely fast driver. Always in contention for a podium. Ben Bennyworth.
I think he was runner-up in the Czech Alpine Championship last year, wasn't he?
In the Alpine Championship last year. But I also agree with you on Jack Bonney. It's very impressive to see Jack Bonney up there in that mix as well, and Stanley Donaldson as well, having a very, very good first round in the SRBC Championships. Yes, he's done some SRES before, but obviously touring cars and Porsches, very, very different kettle of fish to that sort of racing. But Costas, one thing I wanted to come across with you is how are you finding the change from the Clio Cup car to the Porsche? Because I think that was the last actual series you did with us, which was quite a little while ago. I could be incorrect on that, but I'm fairly sure the last championship you did with us was back in the Clios, possibly in the old venue.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's the last series I did was in the Clios. Very, very different car to drive. The thing with the Clio is if the back end steps out, mash your foot down and it's going to come back round. You can save the car. You try doing that with the Porsche and you'll end up in the barriers upside down. But it's the challenge is there. I'm enjoying the challenge. It was yourself that twisted my arm to come back this year with the Porsches. So yeah, no, it's a fun car to drive. But yeah, frustrating at times as well.
I mean, my personal biggest surprise from round 1 as a whole was actually Connor Daly's performance. That he's a very, very fast driver. I've seen him with lots and lots of pace. Normally he does a lot of Friday Night Unlimited racing at the venue, which obviously is an SRBC. He didn't practice, but naturally very fast driver, so I was surprised to see him finishing so low down the order. You
hit the nail on the head there, I think, Grant, and it really did show. Connor's a fantastic driver, and he was right at the back in free practice. And got quicker and quicker as the day went on through qualifying in both races, and yeah, you could see as he got more familiar with the car. This is not a car that you can just jump in and expect to go fast straight away. I mean, the Alpine certainly wasn't. This even more so, and it does show that drivers like John, drivers like Aidan, Martin, the people who are putting the effort in are able to come and do a lot of testing and really get to know the car. They're really getting the dividends from it.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you on the point with Connor and Aaron as well, to be fair. Both of them are really, really good drivers. I've done quite a lot of Friday nights with them.
I mean, Aaron's been in America over the summer, so
yeah, Aaron's not had the chance to practice too much because of his other commitments. But both of them are really, really good drivers, and I think it does just show how difficult this car is to jump in and drive. It's something that even with myself, I know I've done quite a lot of practice. I know Costas has done some as well. Aidan has done plenty as well. And it really does show that even with the amount of practice that you get in, it's still such a difficult thing to do.
So looking ahead to Brands, so we're right in saying 30 laps.
30 laps, yeah.
Now, I know you guys have just had a go and had a short test session. I know you didn't do any full race runs or anything, but from having a chat before we came on here, it's not so much tyre wear that might be the problem, although that's probably going to be an issue in itself. Probably start with you, Costas. It seems to be more maybe it's overheating.
Yeah, I mean, the bit of practice that I've just done was just to get a handle of a car around the track. Didn't try doing any stints, but you can see tyre wear is there. With the back end wanting to step out, either on corner entry and especially on corner exit, if you get just that little bit of wheel spin, tyres start to overheat, and there's just nowhere to let them rest. So it's just something that keeps snowballing. And once they start going, if you can't bring it back in line, it's going to be very hard to keep it on the track.
And John, there's probably an issue with how difficult this car is to drive and tyre wear, and being Brands Indy, trying to outbrake someone into the inside of Druids is going to be incredibly difficult to get right precisely. I'm looking at watching you guys drive today and thinking, even with the best will in the world, there could well be some unavoidable contact during these races, particularly the reverse grid race.
Absolutely. I mean, from the practice we've just done, that was my second practice session in the car, and it's so unhappy being unsettled. It just absolutely, the car, it makes the car do so many different things that you're not expecting with it being unsettled. And Brands being the type of circuit that it is, the car's basically constantly unsettled with bumps in the braking zone, and it's so easy to lock a wheel in these as well. So yeah, I think you're probably right. Even not including the reverse grid, there's going to be a high chance that there's going to be some unavoidable contact with someone trying to move somewhere, and the car just not enjoying what someone's trying to do with it. And then who knows what's going to happen in the reverse grid race, especially with the slightly inexperienced people that have joined the championship again this year that haven't done massive amounts of sim racing before. It could be carnage. It could be smooth as anything. I think we're going to see a lot of people, same as we did at Donington, falling off by themselves as well. As Costas mentioned, the tyres just don't get a rest, and they heat up so quickly on the Porsche around here. And it's not as if it's one side. I know it's a very clockwise circuit with mostly right-hand turns. It's not as if it's just the one side, like the left-hand side, that's overheating. The right-hand side is also suffering from it as well, and it just means that within 2-3 laps, the tyres are, you can feel the understeer starting to work in, and you can feel that the car isn't enjoying what it's doing, and that it's becoming even more unsettled, and it's just that progressive ball starts rolling, and all of a sudden you find yourself trying to turn into a corner and you're almost on opposite lock.
So John, one thing I wanted to quickly jump onto before we potentially move on to the next subject, obviously with the role that you play for NAPA in real world racing, mostly being down to the tyre management, looking after the tyres, doing tyre blankets and stuff like that, has that changed your attitude, would you say, to how you drive the car in the sim when you have to think about tyre wear and tyre management?
I'd say not necessarily in the Porsches so much, mainly because the way that the Porsches run in real life and in the sim, there's not a hell of a lot you can do to change what you're doing to drive the car. It drives a certain way, and if you don't drive it that way, you're going to be miles off the pace. It's a very edgy car, and it does mean that you do have to sort of pay a little bit more attention to what you're doing with the tyres. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You do try and look after them a little bit more, and it has made me, especially in touring cars, pay a bit more attention to what I'm doing tyre-wise. But because you're quite limited on option, especially in the Porsches, of how the car wants to be driven to get the lap time out of it, I haven't been able to let it affect me too much on paying attention to what the tyres are doing, just because if I do, I'm going to end up going backwards effectively.
Just before we move on to touring cars, Grant, I just was looking at the point standings there. I just want to say a word about Pierre Delby, actually, because he came into the Alpines last year. Someone I enjoy racing with towards the back of the field, because I'm not very good, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I thought he did really well at Donington. I think compared to what we saw with the Alpines last year, showed a big step forward. No, made 1 or 2 errors. I think he had a spin in race 2, but I did see him running towards the front of the field in the reverse grid. And yeah, it was really good to see him take a good step forward, and hopefully we'll see him towards the front now and again. It's nice to see drivers sort of come through and make progression. So I just wanted to highlight. I thought Pierre did really well at Donington.
I completely agree with that. I mean, Pierre comes in and gets a fair amount of practice in as well before each round, so fair play. It does show that it really does pay off, especially in these cars. We've gone over and over about how difficult they are to drive. Practice definitely makes perfect. John, just before we come back to you, I just want to quickly ask Costas a couple of things, because he's been a little bit quiet for the last few minutes, so let's get you more involved, Costas. So, number one, a sort of silly question. Would you rather it was the Renault Megane, or would you rather it was the Porsche 992 Cup car?
The Megane is fun. Megane is, it's fun. But with the Meganes, you're just holding on for dear life, whatever you do. The Porsches, I find the Porsches more rewarding. If you nail that lap, it's just such a nice feeling coming through out of corners. The Megane just wants to kill you at every single opportunity. It's like being out with a psychopath.
And my second point is basically going to be, are you more focused, would you say, on qualifying for brands, or are you thinking full long-term race? Because overtaking, as we've already already mentioned, apologies, is difficult. Outbraking each other is very difficult. So do you think track position is going to be quite key? Like, do you think it's worth completely focusing on race pace, or do you think it's more worth getting that hot lap in?
6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If you can keep it consistent, qualifying up front is definitely going to be the way to go. I know I haven't got the pace to keep up with the likes of Aiden. So it's going to be much the same of keep my head down, try and keep my own race, and if the guys in front fall off, then I'll just try and maximise, which worked in my favour in race 1. Race 2 didn't quite work out that way, but I'll definitely try and repeat that for brands.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with that, to be honest. I mean, I think I'd possibly err more towards qualifying being more key, especially if you can keep the consistency and keep the car on track, because there is a high possibility that people are going to be falling off through their own doing. So I'd say personally, I'd probably expect qualifying to be a little bit more competitive and a little bit more focused for a lot of the drivers. I mean, I'm in the same boat as Costas. I've got absolutely no hope whatsoever of keeping up with the pace of Aiden. He seems to be on a completely different level in this car. But things happen. There's a possibility that he could have a bad qualifying session. There's a possibility that he may have an issue during the race. He may fall off somewhere.
Just very quickly, because it's such a short track, there's an issue of back markers and lap traffic as well, potentially.
Yeah, that could really play into, well, anyone's hands really. It depends on where everyone is on circuit. But yeah, back markers could become an issue quite quickly as well. And
yeah, I mean, 100%. There was some back markers we went through around Donington, but yeah, back markers around here can definitely throw a spanner in the works, especially if they're expecting you to go one way. So it could ruin people's races. But yeah, people behind could maximise from it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, great to hear your thoughts on the upcoming and previous races in the Porsches. Let's move on to the touring cars now. And has to be said, Manley looked pretty ominous throughout the whole of race 1, race 2, race 3, qualifying, practice, the whole weekend, the whole shebang. Manley was fast in every single session.
He was, and it's kind of, I think we all expected Lewis to be the man to beat, because he's the only one of the top 3 from last year's championship that's with us this season. Adam's not doing touring cars, obviously Callum Cripps isn't here. So he was always going to be marked out as the favourite. Obviously, I'm sure we'll discuss the technical problems that he had in race 2 very shortly. But yeah, he did win race 1, he did win race 3, but he was under a lot of pressure both times. Obviously, we had the incident in the last lap of race 3 where John was putting him under a lot of pressure, and there was sort of some conflicting views about sort of defence and going down Starkey straight on the last lap. So, yeah, I mean, Lewis on paper could have ended up winning all 3 races, not the technical problem, but from what I saw and knowing that, having seen how he reacted to pressure and everything, I don't think I've seen enough to say that he's necessarily going to have it all his own way. Because going into Donington, I was thinking it might end up just potentially being a bit of a Manley procession this year, and I don't think that's going to be the case. He's still definitely the favourite of the championship, but I think he's going to get a lot of competition.
I mean, at the end of race 1, Martin Buchan was all over him. You know, he managed the tyres better, and Martin actually set a faster race lap in race 1. It was the only time a driver that wasn't Lewis, I think, set the fastest lap. Although I think Aiden actually sneaked in a super fast lap in race 3, completely out of nowhere. But yeah, Martin is definitely going to push Lewis all the way. And I think with Martin is, if he does have an incident in his race, he's very good at just recovering back. He just keeps his head calm, focuses on the job in hand, dispatches the other drivers nice, quickly and cleanly, and gets himself back up to a really decent points scoring position again.
It's probably a good chance to bring in John, actually, because you were behind Lewis and right on him all the way through race 3 from start to finish. You had to go on the last lap. It didn't work out, but you went for it. What is your thought process over the course of that race in terms of when to attack? And did you learn anything from your driving from being behind him for so long?
Well, I'd like to make a point first. I think I agree with where you guys were coming from with that. I was almost expecting this season to be a little bit of a manly procession, just with him being as quick as I know he is, and from his previous experience. However, I found myself quite pleasantly surprised to be within a tenth of him for pretty much most of the races and the weekend in general, and to only be just under 2/10 behind him in qualifying. I mean, I was a good second and a half off of him last year. So I was quite pleasantly surprised to find that, and I think that between myself, Martin, possibly Aiden, once he's got to grips with that BMW as well, with the speed that he has, will really, really be pushing Manly to the championship. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's something that we can say is a surefire thing. Following Lewis for the entirety of that race, it was quite difficult. I ended up using my hybrid in the wrong places, basically. I could feel him starting to get away from me sort of earlier on, and I ended up using more of my hybrid than I probably should have done to keep within touching distance of him. But I don't think I learnt a lot from following him. Both of our driving styles are fairly similar to one another. The Focus likes, again, like the Porsche, the Focus likes to be driven in a certain way to get the time out of it, and again, if you don't drive it in that way, you end up quite far off the pace. So I don't think I can say that I did learn a hell of a lot following him for that race. I felt that I had probably got the pace to get past him towards the end. Yes, the incident was unfortunate. However, from a personal standpoint, it probably was avoidable, and I agree that there was no penalty given after the review of everything. However, I personally couldn't predict where Lewis was going to go. I don't feel he's a particularly predictable driver when he's defending. You can't pick whether he's going to go inside, outside, and I know that's good for him, but also at the same time, as someone following someone trying to overtake, it just doesn't fill you with confidence, and it means that you don't know what's going to happen when you come to a braking zone, whether you're actually going to be able to complete the pass or not. And I think that's mainly where the contact came from in that last lap incident between me and him. Was I was probably a little bit far back, and it was a bit of a half move, but the only reason I went for the half move was because I didn't feel that I could go for a full move, not knowing what he would do in that situation. The contact came from when I then had to steer left to try and avoid the contact, because I was expecting to run into the back of him where he started coming right in the braking zone after multiple moves down the straight. So I agree with the decision that was made, and yes, I haven't got an issue with him taking that race win. I'm very glad that the stewarding was done the way it was over the course of the weekend. Paddy did an absolutely excellent job, and I'm quite happy with my performance over the course of the weekend, because I ended up recovering same as he did in race 2. Again, following him along, I had the same sort of issue. But yeah, it was what it is basically, and I will try and learn from it in the future.
You'd mentioned earlier about the Focus needing to be driven in a certain way. Now, I'm not doing the touring cars, so I don't know. I'm hoping to do a couple of rounds towards the end. I mean, is it difficult jumping in from the Porsche, which obviously drives the way that it does, to going into a front-wheel drive car? You know, you've just come out of this, you've driven it for, you know, a couple of hours, and now straight away you're into another series with a car that just drives so different. I mean, to me, that's a hard transition from one to the other.
It sort of is, but it also isn't. It's a difficult one to describe. I struggled a lot more with it last year in the Alpines and the few touring car rounds that I did last year. I struggled with it a lot more then than I did this year. I think it's because I'm as comfortable as I am in the Focus. I really enjoy the car. It drives exactly how I want it to. And I just feel that I've got the pace in the car. So it is difficult because the two machines are completely different to one another. But having the experience I now have, especially from last year, the Alpine was incredibly pointy, and then jumping into a touring car felt like it was a boat almost. So gaining from that experience, it's a lot easier to jump from one car to the other now. But because they're both unique in driving style, it's a lot easier to sort of transfer the fact that they both like to be driven a certain way.
That's interesting to hear that. So basically you know them both so well. It's just switching from one to the other. It's just like jumping on a bike. It's not too much to it.
Okay, so let's. It was interesting about the Manley discussion about the defensive. I don't want to go too much onto it, but there have been other drivers that have actually spoken to him about it before. They've gone to him on a one-to-one basis. I won't name names because I don't think it's fair to, but as someone that's been in the venue and overheard these conversations, it's very interesting that it's always the same sort of thing. He does drive extremely defensively, which, as John mentioned, it does work for him at times, but it can also mean he does get involved in a fair amount of incidents where the car behind just doesn't really know how to react to what he's done. So it is interesting that there's, and these are high caliber drivers that have spoken to him as well. Like I said, I'm not going to mention names, but they have mentioned to him. So I wonder if after Donington, if Lewis is going to look back and maybe think, maybe I need to just change my approach in the defensive driving a little bit. I know it was the last corner on the last lap. I know it's that, but if it's going to happen at one race, it could happen at every race. And then, for example, imagine someone's on the rear end of him at Thruxton going into the final chicane. Is he going to do the same thing again? If he does, he's going to end up in, the barriers there. He's not going to end up across the runoff. It could really, let him down.
I mean, it's a good point to bring up the next point I think we're going to talk about on our agenda. You can see that it, and I don't want to sound like I'm doing Lewis down here, but if I was in his shoes, I'd be going back watching race 1 and 2 and watching Chris Wilson again. Because his defending in both of those races were absolutely superb. In terms of getting right on the line of holding up, it was like a proper Jarno Trulli train. Of race 1 in particular, how we managed to hold up, you had you, John, and Ben, I think Aidan was in there as well. All through the second half of race 1, he held up Ben in race 2. He got 2 podiums out of it, and he's third in the championship. You can see on the screen there as a result. Just do great defensive driving. He didn't quite have the ultimate pace that Lewis or Martin had, but it was proper Sergio Perez, Abu Dhabi 21 Mexican Ministry of Defense stuff. It was really, really good to see. And I think, I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing Lewis because he's clearly a fantastic driver, a much better driver than me, but I think everyone in the field could probably learn a thing or two from how Chris defended.
Yeah, Chris appeared to be driving the widest voxel ash drive I've ever come across in my life. And he was incredibly difficult to try and make a move on. His defence was pinpoint perfect, and it wasn't that he had the outright pace. It wasn't that he was running away from anyone. I mean, there was me, Aidan, Ben. Who else was involved? I think it was just the 4 of us for most of that race 1. But it was a constant battle for basically the entire second half of the race.
What I enjoyed about it the most was how it actually pushed the 3 of you into battling each other instead of working together. It's almost like there was that frustration of, well, the driver in front hasn't managed to get past him yet, so I'm going to try and get through and see what I can do as well. That was really interesting to see, which then actually gave Chris a bit of a buffer at the end of the race. So it really worked really well for him. So yeah, I personally, in my opinion, it was the drive of the whole event. It was very well done. It wasn't dirty or malicious in any way, you know, and I really enjoyed watching it. I mean, if he wouldn't have got punted out in race 3, he'd be right up there in the standings with Buchan as well. So it's really exciting to see where this could lead.
Yeah, I think in the Touring Car Championship, I think Chris is probably the Mr. Consistency. It's not, and we saw this last season, it's not with the best one in the world that he's got very often that he's got the absolute ultimate pace, but he's not a slow driver by any means, and he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. I mean, yes, he got punted in race 3. It wasn't his fault. There was a lot of reverse grid. A lot of those kind of things happen. But he keeps getting the points, and he keeps just racking him up and going along absolutely fine and getting the points on the board. So Chris could still very much be a factor in this championship, because ultimately, when we saw Martin in the Porsches in race 1, obviously Lewis has some technical issues beyond his control there. In terms of these kind of things can happen. There'll be drop scores to come into play at the end of the season when we get to April, and yeah, I wouldn't rule Chris out entirely at all. If he can pick up a couple of wins, particularly in race 3s, he could be up there.
Yeah, I think Chris is really going to be one to watch. I mean, he's admitted openly himself that he hasn't got the outright pace of the likes of Martin, Manley, me on a good day in the Focus specifically. Chris is normally pretty quick and normally a lot faster than me in a lot of things that we drive together. It just seems that the Focus gets some better time out of me, basically. But Chris is definitely going to be one to really keep an eye on, especially if he can keep the consistency that he's shown at Donington and the defensive skills that he's shown at Donington. I mean, me, Aidan and Ben must have swapped places God knows how many times behind him, trying to make a move on him, and not one of us could get past him at any point. I ended up tapping him into the final chicane. I slightly outbraked myself. It didn't affect either of us. We both carried on in the same position we were in. But it was, again, just... I had absolutely no way past him. I didn't know whether to go left, didn't know whether to go right. His defence was spectacular. I couldn't get the cut back on him at all. It was just pinpoint perfect. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, one of the best things about that battle and the weekend as a whole is that the racing was hard, but it was, on the whole, very fair. I think people who maybe went for moves that didn't have a lot of contact, it was just people maybe being over-exuberant. There wasn't any dirty driving. Certainly the battle that the four of you had was absolutely excellent throughout, as I'd expect from you, Aidan, Ben and Chris and everything. I know Aidan probably struggled in the touring cars a little bit sort of relative to how he did in the Porsches. I know he said he was struggling to get heat into the BMW's tyres. I think, in hindsight, from what he's telling me at Donington, I think he feels a little bit foolish in picking the BMW. But it also showed, we also saw over the course of the race weekend with the 6 new drivers. So if you look at the points table there, the top 6 of the drivers that have been here before, the bottom 6 of the drivers who are new to us. Charlie, Kieran, Gareth Boyle in particular got better and better over the race weekend. I think I'm looking forward to the rest of the season, probably Grant, something we spoke about earlier. Charlie and Gareth in particular looking really, really good. And with more experience in these cars, they're going to become more of a factor as the season goes on.
I was really impressed with Charlie. You could always see him when the Chris Wilson train was going on. Every shot you could just see him just sticking in the background, just trying to stick to the back of the train.
It does help that his car looks like Mr. Blobby.
It does help that his car looks like Mr. Blobby. Definitely, you can potentially see it. If you're watching this, you can see it on the screen now. It's the car that we're chasing. But yes, you could see him in the back of the screen, but he was very consistent with his lap times. You know, there was a few little errors here and there, but it is to be expected with people that are new to this championship. Costas, I don't know if you've driven any of these touring cars at all, so are you sort of looking forward to doing some guest appearances later in the year? Maybe see how you get on with them? Are you going to do some maybe testing first and see if there's any particular car that you really gel with, and then maybe go from there, or are you just going to sort of wing it?
Yeah, I think I'm going to need to do a bit of testing. I've never driven any of the touring cars for this year, so I have no idea what to expect. Having the hybrid to play around with as well, that'll be something new for me. So yeah, I'll have to make a bit of time, come in, get a bit of testing done, and see which car suits me best, and then just go from there. But definitely looking to get a couple of races in.
Yeah, sort of adding on to that, for you possibly doing some guest appearances, I would heavily advise testing. All of the cars are great in their own respect. They're all roughly on the same sort of pace as well. However, they are all incredibly drive independent, so they each have their own personal characteristics that make them suitable for some drivers and not others. It's part of the reason that I picked the Focus, other than the fact that I'm affiliated with NAPA, and they probably would have been slightly angry with me had I not picked the Focus, but honestly, I'd have probably end up picking it anyway, just because it suits my driving style personally.
If I could just add very quickly, because I've driven the Focus a few times, of all the different cars, F1 cars, Caterhams, everything I've driven, that Focus is the most enjoyable car I've ever driven here. It's so reliable and predictable, and it just, you ask it to do something, and it does it. It's just, but particularly when you're trying to get used to trying to drive a consistent full race distance, it's everything we talked about the Porsches that it doesn't do, the Focus does. So I think it's no coincidence that half the grid are driving Foci, because it's just such a reliable, safe car to drive, and you feel you can drive it consistency lap after lap.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was really impressed with Ben Bennyworth as well in the Cupra. I think he's our only Cupra driver on the whole grid. Because everyone that tested the Cupra, even those that had chosen the Cupra without doing any testing, which is a crazy thing to do, by the way, don't do that. They all found it was so, like, it was almost too lazy for them. It was very safe, and the pace was there, but it almost felt frustrating to drive. You know, like, you're always waiting for it to sort of wake up and go round the corner. It is okay to drive, and like I said, the pace is there, but very understeery. And to be honest, Ben Bennyworth very quietly scored a fair chunk of points in the first round.
It's worth mentioning the Touring Car Championship last year. He only lost third place in the championship on countback, and he lost it because he hadn't won a race all season. He finished level on points with Adam Christopher, but he hadn't won a race all season. He's very, very good. He's very consistent, gets the job done. If he gets involved in incidents, they generally seem to be beyond his control. So, yeah, again, like we said about Chris, consistency, avoiding errors, it's going to be even more so in the Porsches, but in the touring cars, is still going to be really, really important, especially in race 3, where you're going to have less experienced drivers at the front of the field and you've got to work through.
Definitely. Looking ahead, in terms of the championship, I'm going to want to get some long-term predictions from everyone in the room. Now, this is going to bite us all very hard, I'm sure. It's all going to bite us very hard at the end of the season. And I'm going to predict, might sound a bit crazy, but I'm going to predict that Martin Buchan wins the championship at Brands GP. Like, he takes it in the final round of the season after a very, very hard-fought battle. I think his performance and his way of getting through the field is going to be really helpful in those reverse grid races, and I think it's just going to be that little bit of an edge to get him ahead of Lewis in the championship.
I think John is going to win the championship after 5 people in front of him in the championship suspiciously get locked in the toilets on the on the morning of the last race. No offence, John.
I mean, that's still saying that he would be in contention. You know, he would still have to be in contention to do that.
I want to make the point, he didn't rule it out.
I'm saying nothing. No, I'd like to say that I think it's going to come down to Lewis or Martin. I honestly couldn't pick who. I'd like to think that I could be somewhere in contention. I mean, looking at after the first round, one good weekend completely changes the order of where everyone sat. I think it's going to be very, very touring car-like, and probably come down to the last round, but I'll call Martin.
Just to mention, I think drop scores might come into play here, because obviously each driver can drop what their one worst round as a whole round, and obviously commitments elsewhere in life, which are obviously less important than this, come into play. So it might just be having a bad round where the drivers have a miss round, because, for example, if you can't come to a round, then you don't have the flexibility to drop one. So if you're not able to do all 7, it does kind of compromise you a little bit. So that, if it's going to be this close between Lewis and Martin in particular, that might have a big impact.
Definitely. I think Lewis can make every single round. Not sure about Martin. Chris Wilson is missing Brands Indy though, so that is going to shake up the standings a lot, because obviously with him being in P3, obviously in the grand scheme of things it will equalise, but yeah, scoring no points at all, but not knowing, it's a strong track for Chris as well. He's performed well in the past there, so to not be able to race there potentially means that he's taken away from himself of scoring more points, so it's definitely going to mix things up.
Do we get to blame Genevieve for this?
Sure.
Is that whose fault? Is that whose fault it is?
Yes.
So Chris is a new father for those of you
I'm just
not
going to say
familiar.
that. I'm just going to
It's
say
it's
yes.
family
It's
commitments.
probably not. He'll put in the comments whether we're right or
Yes, I'm sure he will.
not.
I mean, saying there about who's going to take the title, I think that drop round, like you were saying, is just going to take it. It's all going to count on that. People will be coming into that final round not really knowing how it's all going to pan out. But I think the big thing, if you can't make a round and that is your dropped round, it leaves you no room for errors. You have to be Mr. Consistency, and I think Chris is that person. I mean, with myself, just with the Porsches, I aim to make all the rounds because I know the way the car is, I'm expecting a scrappy round.
Yeah, race 3 tends to be quite messy with the drop grid. It has a lot of history. A lot of championship contenders tend to get wiped out at turn 1 as well, which also comes into play with the Brands GP race as well later in the year. So it's going to be a really unpredictable round, which is I think it's going to shake up the championship completely, let alone the Chris Wilson effect. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the positions. I think we may have a surprise winner or two in the next round, and it'll be great for the series. And
well done, Costas. Well done, mate.
Someone who's not even confirmed to be driving in the touring cars at Brands is going to win a race.
You told me it was going to be a surprise.
That's true.
Well, there you are then.
Yeah, agree. Fair enough.
Yeah, I'd quite like to say I'm quite looking forward to seeing some of the new guys as well, see how they develop over the course of the year. I think we could see some surprises, especially out of people such as like Charlie and Gareth. They do seem to have some decent pace behind them and just a little bit more consistency. And I think we're really going to start to see them come forward and start matching the 6 guys that have done this before. So I think we could see some interesting race wins come out of this. Some that I'm sure will upset some people, some that may not. Who knows? Depends on how it pans out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how they develop. I think it's going to be an interesting watch over the course of the season.
And just a word by way of closing remarks, we wrap this up. I just want to say a big well done to Paddy and Annabelle for Brands. There were some difficult decisions to make, or some difficult circumstances with some of the technical problems in the Porsches, and they both dealt with it exceptionally. It's a kind of job, it's a thankless task. You're never going to please everyone all the time, and I thought they dealt with it really, really professionally. So there's the kind of job, it's a bit like football and VAR, isn't it? You never get praise when you get it right, but you're going to get criticised when you get it wrong. So I thought they deserve a bit of praise for getting it right.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would not have wanted to be in either of their shoes during the race 2 issues. I think they did amazingly. I've been in their position before when no matter what you do, no one wins.
We know.
And yes. Unfortunately, it's sometimes you just have to just make the call that you think is right at the time. And it usually does tend to be the best way. You have to think of the bigger picture of, one, what have we done in the past? Is this consistent with what we've done in the past? 2, is this as fair as it possibly can be? Because if it benefits one person but then takes away against anyone else, you can't really do it. If it doesn't benefit anyone, that's usually the option you have to go for. And it's difficult, but it's just one of those things of sim racing. Technical glitches happen, hardware glitches happen. It's like real life motorsport.
One thing I would like to add to what you've just been saying about looking at decisions that have been made in the past, having Paddy now as a race steward who is brand new to us, has sort of null and voided that slightly because he doesn't know what decisions have made in the past. Therefore, it's made his decision making quite straightforward for him. It's made it very easy for him to be able to pick and choose and work out what, where, who, how as to what the incidents have happened and how they should be dealt with. And I think both Paddy and Annabelle, as race director, did an absolutely amazing job. The issues that we ended up having, as you said, in race 2, they are what they are. They're technical issues. It's something that happens in sim racing. And again, I think Paddy stewarding over the course of the entire 5 races that we had that Sunday was absolutely spot on. And they both did an excellent job.
Definitely. I mean, as I was more referencing in the terms of like a race control decision over the stewarding aspect, but you are definitely 100% right on Paddy, and it does definitely bring in a new I mean, it's a new eye into the season, and it's like someone that doesn't know how certain people drive. So if they see someone do something they don't like, they're going to penalise for it, and it's great. It works really well. I think it was a really good combo, and I look forward to seeing them as a duo for the rest of the season. But on that note, I think we are going to wrap it up for the evening. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We look forward to seeing you at the next round on October the 15th. Do you have any sort of closing remarks, guys, about your predictions for your own races, your own preparation? Just a quick sign-off before we do end.
Yeah, I think in the Porsches certainly there's going to be a few people spinning. I think that's it's a bumpy track, and in the Porsches you can't brake over bumps, can't brake and turning, and at Brands you have to do both. So yeah, there's going to be some upset people.
I'm going to make one prediction for touring cars. Given I know he said at Donington how much he was struggling at heating the tyres, which should be a lot easier at Brands, I'm going to say Aiden's going to win at least one race in the touring cars. I think Aiden's going to go really well at Brands.
Yeah, the only thing I can really add to all of this is what both me and Costas have been banging on about basically the entire time we've been talking, which is consistency. It's the only way forward in both of the series. They're both so competitive and both have their own challenges, and if you can find that consistency, it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. If you've been putting in your comments, fantastic. Thank you so much. We are going to be running these throughout the season. We're going to have different guests on each time we do this as well, so we'll try and rotate it. Obviously, if we can get the two championship contenders in for the final one, that'll be very, very cool. But in terms of like availability and stuff like that, we will be mixing it up a little bit, so won't be repeating the same guests every single week. But I do want to thank our two guests this evening as well, Costas and John. Thank you very much for your input. It's been really insightful, really helpful as well. And Dan, always a very intelligent voice and a very good commentator as well. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. We will see you at Brands Hatch on October the 15th. Have an amazing evening wherever you're listening from. Goodbye.